Hello. How are you all? Great. Well, thank you for coming. So I'm really happy to be here. This is my second time giving this presentation. I did this once last year, and if you have returned, yes, there is some new information. At least one of the things I am making sure that I am doing is continuing to look at information that is more applicable. I think it's really easy for us in our positions as medical professionals to just spew information and then expect people to understand it. What I have learned a lot over the last year and what I have continued to learn is just being able to make ourselves available to our community and to be able to hear things from you, especially as parents, and being able to sort of tailor not just the information itself, but also understanding that we are all part of this, right? And by this, I mean what we say the dance health ecosystem. And that looks very different from the studio to college to professional company. And for us specifically, we know that the studio environment is one that just hasn't gotten as much, I would call it infrastructure support, which I'll talk a little bit about. So today, supporting our growing dancers, families, and the dance health ecosystem. My name is Rob. I am currently right now, I am a dance performance physical therapist. I previously was a professional dancer for about 7 or 8 years up in Los Angeles, and I've always been present in Orange County, both as a student, as a teacher, and now I do a lot more health education than necessarily straight dance, and then I also have my own practice, which is dance prehab, physical therapy, and performance. So really quick, I know we just have some brief time, but I'd like to give a quick overview, some brief introductions so you know who you're talking to and know who I am, and I'm not just a random guy that just walked in. We'll talk a little bit about some considerations we're thinking about when we're thinking about your child participating in dance, some perspectives in rehab and training with respect to growth and maturation. So yes, dancers, but also growing humans. And then some strategies and considerations for the dance, for us as parents. What are some things you might be thinking about? So if this feels like a lot, it's okay, it is a lot. I hope that with this resource, and if you have this with you, it's just a little reminder, everything is a continual conversation. So a little bit about myself. My name is Rob. I am a performing arts physical therapist and educator. I am very passionate about creating healing spaces and health learning opportunities as such, and ultimately allowing dancers to explore their physical capabilities to support their artistry. And when I say physical capabilities, I mean that both in healing and rehab, in physical therapy, but also in training, strength and conditioning. As far as my experience as a dance performance physical therapist, previously I served the UC Irvine dance program as their resident physical therapist. I am a graduate of Chapman University of both their dance program and their physical therapy program, so I've retained a very close relationship with that program, so we support them. And then as far as Orange County goes, it's a hotspot for dance, and so we are very privileged, I should say, to be able to say that we are able to support dancers from all walks. We also support dancers from competing studios. And so if, we like to really see our work as a sort of neutral ground when we know things can get really competitive. As an educator, I currently am a lecturer at Chapman University. I was very fortunate to be offered an opportunity to teach there, consolidating all of the education that I have done over the last 6 years in workshop formats. We have an ongoing relationship with the ABT Gillespie School out here where we offer workshops and teacher education. And then beyond California, I have been invited to other schools such as the Houston Ballet Academy, a couple other schools out on the East Coast virtually to also lecture on health and wellness situations. Also included are other colleges, and I also am part of a few ongoing projects that are within the competitive dance circuit as well. So kind of everywhere, but I think it just helps to draw a very, very cohesive view of just where everything exists and where we can find our place. Was very honored to receive a Dance Education Organization Award from the International Association Dance Medicine and Science in 2023. Great. Last but not least, I have a son. He's 17 months now, and it's wild. So I think these conversations, talking to parents, has definitely changed for me. Crystal, I am her husband. She is also a dance educator in our Orange County area. She is a graduate of UC Irvine, both with her BFA and her master's. So we both approach dance education from very much looking at it from a pedagogical perspective. I would say we take our teaching pretty seriously, both in terms of our learning as well. I love hiking, and I love chocolate chip cookies. Great. The human parts. Okay. As far as dance prehab physical therapy goes, our service is we do provide physical therapy, and aside from that, we also provide what we have been calling prehab, which is basically sessions tailored to the dancer to kind of learn about their body depending on what their performance needs are, and depending on where their age is. The needs of a 12-year-old is very different from the needs of an 18-year-old, is very different from the needs of a professional who's 24, right? And then, of course, this is part of our education and learning initiative where we're doing a lot more education in the community, both for parents. I have also spent some time with the teachers here at Focus, and today I'm absolutely going to move with your kiddos. And I always look forward to spending time here as well. Great. Really quick, a little bit about myself is that I actually did not grow up here. I grew up in Taiwan, and so my perspective on dance was also informed by that. I did not learn dance how they would have been at the studio, like a ballet, jazz, tap. I learned dance more so as a cultural, as a piece of a cultural movement. So break-in, for example, wasn't just like a cool dance. Break-in came from 1970s New York. Ballet came from 16th century Italy and France. Modern dance came from an American rejection of ballet techniques. And so that has filtered into what I sort of perceive health to be, and that is that culture is a very, very huge part of what we need to talk about. I think we all know that dancers need some kind of strengthening. Everyone should be conscious of what their health is, obviously, but what are the cultural energies and notions of health and wellness, and being able to speak about health that has been informed by dance. Traditionally and historically, ballet with being very rigid, that's always kind of the example I go to, because it's hard to talk about health sometimes. And I think as parents, that's a really great place where you can help us out, right? And we can help each other out for the longevity of our dancers, right? We can influence their beliefs, their perceptions, and their attitudes. And sometimes we can't. As a parent, sometimes you're like, no, and you're like, all right, you just no. But I think cohesively, there have, at least with the way that we work with families, sometimes we want to know what are some things that might be difficult for them to understand, and how can we figure out a way where what we are saying is consistent with what you are saying and therefore there is cohesion and there's no confusion between what is happening or expectations of healing. Yeah. So some training considerations as far as what our dance community, and especially in competitive dance, there are, once again, these different ideas and notions of success. And one of these is that early intensive training leads to success, that sports specialization is something that is absolutely required in order to achieve a certain level of performance. So what we know, if we start with early sports specialization, so let's say, right, ballet or dance historically, starting when they're 3. And so they've always had this movement experience that is rooted in dance. A lot of the things that we do is I'll ask them always to move in non-dance ways, or I try to promote that. Sometimes I'm not really, especially when they're growing, sometimes I'm not concerned with, we always think about placement and posture and things like that. But sometimes I just want to know, how confident do you feel if I have you go chase this ball? Because that's going to tell me a lot more about how you feel confident moving. And then that way they get to develop different ways of movement, not just within dance, that then can contribute to their overall just movement health. So 1. 2, there is definitely a perpetuation of a scarcity mindset sometimes, and I speak this, I just like to speak this into existence, especially with things like social media. Kids have different expectations. They see a 3-second thing somewhere, and all of a sudden They're like, oh my God, I'm not as good as this person. And that definitely can play a role in kind of how they feel about communicating about their health. They may not say certain things because they don't want it to be known that they're injured because they're scared of losing opportunity. And this happens across the board, right? Both in terms of younger dancers, kids in college who have choreographers coming in, professional dancers who don't want to lose work opportunities. And so being able to help them navigate that it's not just for now, it's also a skill to develop over time. Right. And we will always say to acknowledge, they are dancers, but they are also humans that have chosen dance as their method of expression and their way of learning through the world. So I think as educators for us, and even working in healthcare, we're always trying to make sure that, hey, with growing and changing, there are changes and shifts that may happen. And so we really try to, not just about saying like, oh yeah, you're growing, so like these things, but making it make sense, right? For some dancers, it might feel like they're losing flexibility when in reality bones are just growing longer. For some dancers, it might feel like balance is off, but that's because as they're growing, their body is integrating vision, sensation, and placement, proprioception, and all these things can get out of whack as they're growing. So sometimes they feel like, oh no, I'm like not as good as I was last year. Why? This is why, right? So this is one possibility. So I think being able to have those conversations. And once again, as far as parents are concerned, a few different things to think about, but of course there's like the physical and the psychological growth and how there is a constant interplay between those two. Being aware of our maturational process, and then of course being aware of our nutritional status. These are just kind of blanket statements here. There are resources in our community that I will point you to in the event that you do need that. Great. Are we doing okay? Awesome, thank you. If there's any questions, just shout it out. This is a discussion. So injuries and the growing human, and we're going to talk about a few risk factors and some actionable strategies that have seemed to be able to take hold a little easier over the last couple of years working with families. So a couple things. Number one, growth spurt. So when our dancers grow, their bodies are changing. And so I always liken it to the example I always give the dancers is, okay, imagine you're a car and you're driving, not that we're machines, but you're a car and you're driving down the freeway and you're going like really fast because you got to get somewhere. Now imagine trying to fix your car the same time you're driving at that speed, and that's basically what's happening. There's so many things that are going on, so if it feels discombobulating, that's because in many ways it is, and I think giving them the peace to understand that. So there are temporary changes, like the flexibility that I mentioned when bones grow longer. A little bit of decreased proprioception, so balance can be off. Maybe sometimes it looks like they're being very clumsy, but they're just, if their arms or legs got longer, maybe they're unaware of how much space they're actually moving through. And then, of course, strength and flexibility imbalances. Muscles just take some time to catch up. As far as muscle and bone is concerned, many of the dancers, it just culturally kind of how it exists are predominantly female. And growth, for example, is the best, during periods of growth all the way up into adolescence, into early adulthood is the best time to build bone density. We build bone density by loading it. So that's why we're always promoting weightlifting, not to say that they have to absolutely just get super maxed out, but they have to understand what it feels like to navigate something heavy, because that helps to connect the body in ways that body weight just doesn't. It's not to say that it's not to say that if they don't lift weights, they're not going to be healthy. That's not the case. It's just more so an example of the body adapts to good stress. And over the course of growth, there are ways to introduce methods of good stress, and so that their body can adapt, right? We talk a lot about overuse injury, but the truth is this overuse or is it underprepared? So, just kind of, I know it's like more of a semantics situation, but just something for us to think about. Brain-body connection. So once again, the changes in balance and coordination, how are we just connected to our body? And then some other things would be dynamic stability related to the leg. There are certain, they'll call it like growth-related injuries, but really it's just a natural process. If my bones are growing faster than my muscles, then my muscles inherently are going to start pulling on the tendons at areas where it connects. So if you've heard of things like Osgood-Schlatter's or Osgood-Schlatter's in the knee, or Sievers in the ankle, or there's another Eislin's in the outside of the foot. These diseases, not the greatest word choice, but I guess these conditions are because the bones are growing faster and the tendons are just, there's a little bit more stress on the growth plates. Once again, there are ways to introduce good stress so the body can adapt. And I would say if you're having to deal with things like Osgood-Schlatter's or Sievers, most of the time, this conversation has to be about management. I think sometimes we think about, okay, I just need to cure this pain, which depending on the situation is appropriate. A muscle strain, an ankle sprain, those are things that we can, there are protocols to follow and there is an expectation, whereas if they're growing, we don't know if they're gonna grow like one growth spurt, two growth spurts. Does this growth spurt last 3 months? Does it last 1 month? So I think being able to talk about, if your child is dealing with growth-related injuries, understand that it is more beneficial to come from what we would say a management standpoint, where, all right, if you are having discomfort, what are the strategies you can do to take down the pain so you can continue to move? Or even in terms of pain, the expectation is that sometimes there will be a little bit of discomfort, and how much discomfort is too much, right? And feeling safe to be able to sort of self-regulate. Great, where are we? Oh,
Curious,
yes.
when do the growth spurts usually start, on average?
Yes, so on average, usually girls start earlier, so anywhere between 11 to 13, and then boys usually a year, 2 years after that, so 12 to 15. 12 to 14, 12 to 15. If you have, and we'll talk about this a little bit, if you and I'll put the QR code back up, but one of the things we've been trying to promote the idea of is keeping track of growth. Because if let's say within a 3-month period, there's a 2 or 2.5 centimeter difference between when you last measured height, then that indicates what we call peak height velocity, which means over this period of time, they have grown exponentially, comparatively speaking to previous months. And then I think that as parents can give us, if we can see that, we can say, oh, you've definitely grown. You've grown a lot more. Your rate has increased over the last 3 months, the last 6 months. You're growing. And so if they're talking about growing pains, or perhaps they are dealing with some kind of coordination or some kind of injury related to sudden growth, there is a very transparent conversation that can be had, right? Yes, I hope that answers your question.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
6th, 7th, 8th grade, around there.
Yeah.
Big growth spurt.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's different too. I grew late. I grew when I was 15, I think. Yeah, so, but once again, it's this idea of management and just being able to say, hey, you're growing, you might be feeling things, that's okay. Yeah, as best as we can, right? So, some ways that we can decrease injury risk, resistance training, because it helps build bone density. It enhances our brain-body connection because the body has to coordinate in order to move versus feeling like they're kind of all over the place. Load management is huge because we always like to say more is not better, better is better. And so and this is a larger conversation too with schools and the way programs are set up, but if you didn't take 7 ballet classes a week and maybe you did 6, would we really feel that much of a difference, right? But once again, kind of depends on where they're at. We all know strength and conditioning is important, but I will tell you that even from our perspective, we have had families approach us and ask to, like, hey, we want to add this on top of our child's training, and we have turned them away because we looked at their schedule and we said, no, you're absolutely doing way too much right now. Something has to give. And of course, it's not just like, bye, come back later. But, we try to have a conversation just to see what happens. And sometimes, whether it's school priorities or there are just, programs are set up the way they are and there's no leeway. So that's just a reality of navigating these conversations. And then last but not least, we're talking here today. So education, physical, emotional, social, and communication is always huge. We'll hit on that a little bit. We're going to hit on that now. So these are some things that I think would be very helpful, and at least talking with parents over the last year, 2 years, the constant questions that we're often getting. So number one is communication. So dancers will often not want to talk about injuries. There are a lot of different reasons for this, like as I mentioned, both in terms of kids, pre-professionals, professionals. Sometimes it's the language that they're told. So we all know that to be good at what we do, there has to be some kind of effort. But I'm really not a fan of the no pain, no gain narrative, because I think it does a little bit more harm to our dancers. Sometimes they don't want to talk about their injuries because they believe they'll fall behind. Sometimes they believe that injuries are their fault because they've done something. They're like, oh my God, had I only done this, maybe I wouldn't be injured. They do put a lot on themselves, and that's something I've learned over, that's pretty consistent as far as, working with younger dancers. And sometimes it's kind of like subconscious, even as like with educators, sometimes you just like lets things slip. It's like, well, maybe if you were doing your exercises, and then, what does that create within them, right? Either that or they don't feel seen or heard, right? Maybe they have, and maybe for you as parents, you've gone to medical professionals and doctors that don't necessarily have a dance background, or perhaps less knowledge of dance culture, and so being able to frame the language of healing can be very much more challenging in that respect. So for us, we're always trying to say, provide spaces for open, transparent conversations, and this is ongoing. Sometimes I will have to talk to parents, and we have to come up with like a strategy to kind of say, all right, when do we check in? How do we check in? These are some things I'm noticing that they're saying in the clinic. Maybe that's a way that we can kind of tap into having them feel comfortable and be open. The other one is connecting with a provider who understands dance movement, but also the experience of dance. And then what we say, developing a dancer-centered plan with yourself, the teacher, and others. So I always like to say, how can we bring parents into the fold of a dance-centered health ecosystem, right? And we don't have to know everything, but I think we just have to know that we can talk to each other, and that way, if there is anything that I can say, okay, this we need to sort of nip in the butt, then we're like, okay, how do we go about doing that? The other one is that there are often varied expectations for injuries. Being told not to dance and just rest, right? They stick them in a boot for 6 weeks, and then they're like, great, the boot's off, see you later, you're good to dance. Medically cleared is not performance ready. Medically cleared just means that you're probably not going to injure yourself significantly, but we always go from the standpoint that dancers have to do very athletic things, and so you wouldn't ask a player to play a game right out of a boot, right? Same thing for a soccer player, same thing for any other, sporting, any activity, really. So once again, what are your go-tos? And I think there's a couple of resources that you'll receive after today. I have a list of things that I actually, myself and a doctor in our community who also treats dancers. Actually, I used to see as a college student, and then our relationship has now evolved to more of the medical. But we have a list of things, if you're going to the doctor, have, what are your goals? It's like a little checklist for you, for your dancer, and for your family, just to kind of say, hey, these are the things that we want to be able to talk about. Know who you can have a quick conversation with for clarity. Myself and my staff are always available. If you give us a call, we're always very happy to see where you're at. And most importantly, we always want to make sure we're, excuse me, a good fit. So there have been situations where we have directed families to other people that we know can serve them better. And I think it's, we obviously want to help, but I think first and foremost, it's just making sure that we're the right people. And then last but not least is early action can allow for improved healing outcomes. Sometimes we just wait for too long, or if they're having pain and it's kind of like ebbing and flowing, if an example would be if your dancer is, if they've, sprained their ankle like 3 or 4 times over the course of maybe like a year or two, that's definitely something to have a plan about. And I think ankle sprains is one of those things, for example, like it happens to everybody, right? And people manage it in all sorts of different ways, but I would say depending on where you're at, you're really trying to get them to understand, hey, this is something I need to learn to take care of over time. As far as pain goes, pain is always hard to gauge a little bit. So this is not by any means an end-all be-all. We all know there is research that indicates that pain tolerance in dancers is much higher. There is also the perception that pain is perceived as an integral part of dance training. So they might experience pain and they're like, well, this is normal. We're supposed to feel pain, right? Sometimes there's difficulty distinguishing between good and bad. What is extreme soreness, and then what is something that my body is asking me to pay attention to. And then pain, especially for dancers who are much more flexible, and some of this may be genetic, there is actually a heightened sense, a heightened perception of pain. So sometimes it might not even feel like movement, they just feel like their joints ache. But that's because the body is constantly trying to find stability. I always like to say that pain is the way, it's the way that your body sort of like whispers to you, and you want to listen to the whispers before your body starts screaming at you. So a very simple sort of algorithm, if you will, is what we call the rule of threes. So once again, it's very arbitrary, but if it's greater than the 3 out of 10 pain, if they've had to modify for more than 3 classes, or that pain is present for 3 days, or for greater than 3 days, or does not resolve within 3 weeks, that is generally a good sign to talk to somebody. Not necessarily like, oh my God, we're gonna go see, absolutely start like a plan of care with physical therapy, we're gonna get x-ray, MRI, all these things. No, it's just have a conversation and see where you're at, right? Great. Once again, coming back to discussions that we can have with our dancers during periods of growth and maturation, right? That growth is normal. I think loss of ability is often perceived as laziness or not working hard, so there's a huge behavioral component to it. And that everyone's growth process is different. There has been some research studies talking about how they looked at the way some different dancers matured differently and sort of asked them about their perceptions of it and things of the sort. And so, those that matured earlier were perceived as like, oh my God, they're getting so much better, but that's because they're connecting more with their body on a human level, right? And then later down the line, the ones that matured earlier, they've already had their growth, they've already integrated everything. And so then they're kind of plateauing a little bit when everybody else around them starts maturing, and then everybody else starts improving. They're just catching up. But then that also is something to talk about when, if your dancer matured early, perhaps it's just like understanding that some of the things they might be seeing is that their peers are getting better and they feel like they're plateauing when really it was just, they just hit that process earlier, right? So reminding our dancers that growth and change is normal. Everybody and every body is different. Decrease in performance is not permanent. Once again, muscles have to catch up to bone sometimes. And it can last for quite some time. We talked a little bit about how it could be a month, could be 3 months, could be 2 bouts of 3 months, right? I think after summer is usually when we're like, oh, hey. Yes, great. Let's see if this wants to work today. My apologies. Oh, here. So as parents, you are an integral part of the dance health ecosystem. And in our work as dance performance physical therapists, ultimately, we're here to provide clarity. I think that's the one comment that we have gotten the most. It wasn't that, oh, I learned so much about this injury, or it isn't just like knowledge-based. Everything has to do with like, we're having this, how long is it gonna take? We have these goals, but also with respect to who the human is, right? So if somebody is just starting to grow, like you said earlier on, like 11, and maybe they've grown a lot, they're feeling aches and pains, and this is not always true for everybody, but you're like, if you're starting to grow now, the next 2 or 3 years might be a little bit more tumultuous, right? Or it might not, but I think it's just nice to kind of have that on our radars. You are our connection to what happens on the ground. We are always interested in what you're seeing, what conversations you're having, and ultimately just helping you find the right resources. And then last but not least, it's just getting on the same page. So there are some things that I might tell them in the clinic that, I might shoot a text every once in a while. I'll be like, hey, when you get the chance, just remind them, that once again, everybody is different and everybody's different, and that it's okay, and what are the different strategies that we can make sure that they see themselves for who they are, and that they can make sense of the healing and the training experience for where they are in their life as well. So, yes. A few resources for you. We do have a blog on our website, so there are some things that you can browse through. For example, like the rule of threes, the I'm having pain, how much can I dance right now? It's got a couple of things that you can think about in terms of gauging where your dancer is at. We also started putting some more resources up on our YouTube channel. We have one where we talk about like, how do you advocate for yourself? If you're going to a doctor's visit, what things are you thinking about? If you have to communicate to a teacher, what things might you want to say? If you're working with a physical therapist, what can you learn? So there are some things you can listen in on there, and hopefully that gives you a good idea of where, if we need support, you get an idea of like who we are as people too. This is in your emails. Let's see if I can focus this a little bit more. Let's see, I'm gonna blow this up a little. Okay. So this is a growth tracker, and it's pretty simple. I know it doesn't look simple, but so what you can do with this, and this is something that some parents have found helpful if they are able to find the time to do it. But basically, this is saying that like every month you find the date, you enter in their standing height, their sitting height, and if you take standing minus sitting, it gives you leg length. Right? So leg bones grow faster than torso bones. And then with each subsequent 3-month session, you can figure out how much they've grown in like the last 3 months. As far as rates go, this is just some normative data. So once again, everybody is different, everybody is different. But then, if within 3 months, you've hit more, like if you have a girl and she's hit more like the 2.01 to 2.25 centimeters, we're going with centimeters here, versus in males 2.25 to 2.4 centimeters per 3 months, then you know that there is some progress happening. And sometimes I know we can tell, but it's also nice just to be able to have, I think, like numerical information. It helps my brain sometimes, and for some other parents, it's been kind of nice just to be, hey, look, this. Obviously, if you're going to your pediatrician once a year, they can probably tell you the same information. But then here, you don't have to go to your pediatrician 4 times a year. So I think, and I have this set up just at over, I think that's over, there's enough slots here for like 3 years. So if you want to throw it on your fridge or something like that, or just have it in your back pocket. And that way, once again, I think the goal here is to be able to have actionable conversations. And so it isn't just like, oh yeah, I feel like I'm growing. It's, I know I've grown. And if I know I've grown and we know that there are these changes, then maybe that helps us to have a few more succinct conversations. So this is in your emails. And then if you scroll down, I just have a little chart here to fill out in case, if you found a doctor that you really enjoy working with, jot them down. Physical therapist, registered dietitian, also important, especially for bone stress fractures. There's generally always a nutritional component to talk about. Sports psychology and dance is also something that's coming up, especially dealing with injuries. And then these are just the instructions about how you want to measure, and if you forget which one to add or subtract, this is down here for you. So, yes. Did you have a question?
Yeah, that's very cool. So the sitting height, I'm just guessing their legs need to be like 90 degrees.
Yeah, it's just like sitting against the wall. So you're going from like bottom of the pelvis to the top of the head. Yeah. It's a quick and dirty, but I think that's typically, if you're looking at the way they assess, for example, like youth athletes, very, very similar. You're just trying to decide like, hey, because their legs might grow first and then their torso stays the same, right? So if they're like, oh my God, my hips, like it feels so hard to lift my leg, I feel weaker, my balance is like off. And you're like, well, look, your legs just grew in the last 3 months. Your body didn't change, your legs grew. So, and I think that just allows us to have like a few different types of more specific conversations, I would say. Yeah.
We see that all the time.
Yeah, same.
The legs. Yeah.
Yes, yeah,
Are falling over.
yes.
They don't have their new legs.
Yeah. Yeah, I do have to jump into the next class, but are there any sort of like pressing questions at the moment? You have this presentation in your emails. If you did scan, let me bring it on back. If you scan the QR code, where'd it go? There it is. Oops, did I? Right, there it is. Yes, any sort of pressing questions or anything? No, thank you. One of our, I would say one of the efforts we're trying to make is, just really kind of give families some resources and things like that. I think at the end of the day, of course, we would love to support your dancers in the, if need be, right, knock on wood, all the things. But if not, we are very happy to, try and point everybody in the right direction. So that's first and foremost our goal. Yeah, great.
I'm not a TikTok.
Yes.